Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story.
Look what I got. I've had glasses before, but I generally don't wear them, mostly because I lose them. But these are my new ones. Joe and David and Angel have also got new ones, which I'll put up pictures as soon as Angels come in. Other news. It's Wednesday, which means Wayback Wednesday. Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I'll support you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. Alright, let's try this again. Alright, so we've got She Stole, Mountain Inspiration, there's Dave, there's Josie, there's Tay Eats, Hiking Ontario, Glitter, Ion, Lower, Carnival, Bobby, Keep Digging, Mountain Inspiration, there's Van, Hillbillies, Rock, Blended, Alice, Reef, Brick Girls, Walker, Jericho, New, Blended, Northern Woman, Susan Rambles, Scully, Griselda. Let's see here. There's Ellen. There's my Linda. Let's see. There's Goldie coming from the back, who's not in a gold car. There's Eric twice for reasons. We do have two Erics, so maybe that's why. Michael, and there's African. It looks like African wins. I can win it. Okay, so this is African Lerbito, I think. Don't quote me on that. I'm terrible at remembering and pronunciations. So, and then we've got a WhatsApp number, which I've been tempted by, but I don't understand completely. She does a lot of different stuff. Let's see. Try this again. Welcome to MySpace, beautiful family. Names are, I'm not even going to try that because I will butcher it to pieces. Proud African born, raised in Kenya, and showcase passion of cooking, mostly Kenyan cuisines and other traditional African things, which is cool, very cool. So here is some of her videos and food and village life and some shorts and a few lives which she hasn't had in a little bit, but that's okay. Very interesting if you're interested in the African culture or different cultures. Very cool. I enjoy, learning and seeing the different ways people live and interact. And so check her out. Like, share, comment. Have a good day. All right, the bearded one is going to tell you a story. No, just kidding. It's a history lesson.
History lesson?
Sort of a story, I guess, kind of.
Sort of. It works both ways. This fella's name is Clement Studebaker. Now, for those of you car enthusiasts, yes, this is that same bloodline that gave you the Studebakers that my dad loved having his back in the 50s. But this is the real early, you're talking back in the 1830s Studebakers. And it's also one thing that I kind of enjoy because I always love stories when you get to see a guy go from basically on horseback and on foot, 2 horses, 2 wagons, to the automobile. It kind of shows how progression works. Well, Clement was born March 12th, 1831. So, it's his birthday coming up.
Woo.
Him and his brother, Henry, would co-found the H&C Studebaker Company, which was the precursor to the Studebaker Corporation, which also built the Pennsylvania German Conestoga wagons and carriages during his lifetimes. And then after his death, the automobile circuit started up in South Bend, Indiana. You know, interesting fellow, born in East Berlin, Adams County, Pennsylvania, to his mother Rebecca Moeller and John Studebaker. He was of Pennsylvania Dutch heritage, and at a young age he had learned to work as a blacksmith in his father's shop in Ashland, Ohio. At the age of 20, Studebaker would move to Indiana and teach school in St. Joseph County, Indiana. Well, in 1951, he was working at a threshing machine factory. We've seen threshing machines up here, big, steam, load, loud, all that sort of fun stuff. Well, him and his older brother, again, opened the H&C Studebaker Blacksmith Shop at the corner of Michigan and Jefferson Street in what is now the heart of downtown South Bend, Indiana. For those few football fans, Notre Dame. Go Irish. In 58, Henry's interest in the business was bought out by a younger brother, John Moeller Studebaker. Now, at that time, the brothers were filling wagon orders for the U.S. Army, which they continued throughout the Civil War. Well, as a Dunkard, Henry was a committed pacifist and may have objected to having a part in making war materials. And an official Studebaker Company history simply says, Henry was tired of the business. He wanted to farm, and the risks of expanding were not for him. Well, Studebaker and three other brothers would form the Studebaker Brothers Manufacturing Company. The company was incorporated in 1868 after the Civil War had ended, and Studebaker would serve as president. It would become the largest wagon manufacturer in the world. And it's the only manufacturer of horse-drawn vehicles to successfully switch to automobiles. Well, Studebaker, who happened to get his name out there quite a bit, was a commissioner from Indiana to the Paris Exposition in 1878, and then the World Cotton Centennial in New Orleans. He served as president of the board of the World's Fair Managers in Chicago in 1893. Studebaker was a Republican, and he was a delegate from the South Bend District to the 1880 Republican National Convention and an at-large state delegate in 1888 to the Republican National Convention. President Benjamin Harrison appointed Studebaker to the Pan-American Conference in 1889 to 1990. He had also served as a member of the City Council in South Bend from 1870 to 1872. Now, Studebaker was a member and served as president of the Carriage Builders National Association, was a member of the Board of Trustees at DePauw University, and he also served as a member and president of the Chautauqua Assembly. Now, Studebaker would marry Charity Bratt. I feel sorry for that lady.
I know she was really happy to change her last name to anything.
Anything, yeah. On October the 12th, 1852, a day off of ours, in St. Joseph County, Indiana, the couple had two children, Clem and Eddie, who both died in infancy. His wife died on March 17th, 1863 in South Bend. Studebaker would marry Anna Harper Milburn in September 1864 in South Bend. His wife's father was George Milburn, president of the Milburn Wagon Company. This marriage would also produce three children, George Milburn Studebaker, and Studebaker Carlisle, and Clement Studebaker Jr. George and Clement Jr. would found the South Bend Watch Company. Now, Studebaker was a Methodist and twice a delegate at the General Conference of the Methodist Church, and he went by the nickname of Clem. Well, in spring of 1900, Studebaker would travel Europe, travel to the Aix-les-Bains in southern France under the advice of Andrew Carnegie and J.P. Morgan. Studebaker died at his home in South Bend on November 27, 1901, and Studebaker would be buried at the Studebaker Milburn Mausoleum in South Bend City Cemetery. And some of the Studebakers were moved from the city cemetery, and Studebaker was buried at the Riverview Cemetery in South Bend. Now, several months after the Studebaker's death in 1901, St. Paul's Memorial United Methodist Church had completed in South Bend. Studebaker had contributed funds to build the church in memory of his father-in-law, George Milburn. The completed church was dedicated in 1903. Well, in 1911, Studebaker would acquire the Everett Metzger Flanders Company of Detroit, later forming the Studebaker Corporation. Now, the late Clement's son, Clement Studebaker Jr., had served on the EMF Company's board and had sometimes a position on Studebaker's board. By 1916, Clement Studebaker Jr. had also become president and chairman of the utility North American Light and Power Company. He'd served in other executive positions as well, including as president and chairman of the Illinois Power and Light Company, as well as the subsidiary Illinois Traction Company, as well as treasurer of the Chicago and South Bend Railroad. So there's yet another form of transportation that the family has branched out into.
They're like, we're going to do travel.
Exactly. 1889, Clement Studebaker would complete the construction of a 26,000 square foot mansion on West Washington Street in South Bend, and named it the Tippecanoe Place, probably in honor of the family settlement near Tip City, Ohio. The mansion,
Sure, I thought it was just because they tipped a canoe.
Tippecanoe and Tyler too? The mansion has been carefully restored and converted to a restaurant. Now, as far as...
Wait, they restored it and then converted it.
Yeah, figure that one out.
That seems kind of
silly. Yeah.
We went through all the money to make it look like a beautiful old home, and then we changed it.
Yeah.
Oh my God, people are weird.
Craziness. Now, Studebaker, again, automobile, wagon manufacturer based in South Bend, Indiana, also has a building in 1600 Broadway, Times Square, Midtown Manhattan, and originally was founded in 1852 and then incorporated after the Civil War, 1868. Now, originally the Studebaker Brothers Manufacturing Company, the firm was originally, as mentioned, coach builder, manufacturing wagons, buggies, carriages, and harnesses. Well, they entered the automobile business 1902 after the initial Clement passed on, moving into electric vehicles, and in 1904 would start with gasoline vehicles, all sold under the name Studebaker Automobile Company. Until 1911, its automotive division operated in partnership with Garford Company in Elyria, Ohio, and after 1909 with the EMF Company and with the Flanders Automobile Company. The first gasoline automobiles to be fully manufactured by Studebaker were marketed in 1912. Now, over the next 50 years, the company established a reputation for quality, durability, and reliability. Well, after an unsuccessful merger in 1954 with Packard, the Studebaker-Packard Corporation, and failure to solve a chronic post-war cash flow problem, the Studebaker Corporation name was restored in 1962, but the South Bend plant ceased automobile production on December the 20th, 1963, and the last Studebaker automobile would roll off the Hamilton, Ontario, Canada assembly line on March 17, 1966.
Oh dear.
Now, Studebaker would continue as an independent manufacturer before merging with Wagner Electric in May of 1967, and then Worthington Corporation in February of 1968 to form Studebaker Worthington. Now, Clement Jr., he lived to a right age of 61 years old, again born in South Bend. His dad was one of the 4 kids that helped manufacture, the blacksmith shop, going to wagons, going to carriages.
Mm-hmm.
It was all part of the wonderment of mobility and stuff like that. According to historian Albert Ruskell Erskine, young Clement served as an apprenticeship with Studebaker, working in several departments and rising to a board position and treasurer. He elsewhere recorded as having been the EMF company's vice president, presumably after that company's takeover by Studebaker in 1910. By 1916, he had moved on to become president and chairman of the utility North American Light and Power, and the precursor of the North American Company. At various times, he also served as president and chairman of the board of the Illinois Power and Light Company and the South Bend Watch Company, as well as treasurer of the Chicago South Shore and South Bend Railroad. Around 1920, Studebaker would move on to Chicago. Well, Studebaker would marry Alice Ron of Philadelphia on April 27, 1893. They would have 2 children, Clement Studebaker III.
Oh my God. That just feels mean.
I know. You're another Clement, aren't you? Well, sadly, yeah. And Esther. After their marriage, they lived in Tippecanoe Place in the South Scott Street in South Bend for a time. After moving to Chicago, they lived in a house on the corner of Jefferson Boulevard and Greenlawn Avenue. Well, Studebaker would die of heart complications at his 1500 Lakeshore Drive home in Chicago on December the 3rd, 1932. The body would be shipped back to his hometown in South Bend and then buried at the family mausoleum in South Bend City Cemetery. Now, funny part is 2 wills were found. The first of which left his $2 million estate to, among others, several colleges. The second will, which superseded the first, left his fortune to his 2 children. So, depending on which will you want to believe in more. But the one item that also I got kind of a kick out of was that when they talked about originally, the original Clement was born in 1831, worked with American wagons and carriage manufacturers. This was part of the company, the Studebaker Corporation, the H&C Studebaker Company. They were the ones that were building the Conestoga wagons. Now, for those of you who've seen a couple of our clips, you think about the Conestoga wagons. These were the stagecoach wagons that made their way up here to Deadwood. And when we did that shoot of the Days of 76 Museum, I would almost be willing to bet that some of those wagons in that basement came from the Studebaker Corporation.
Maybe.
Because they were Conestogas. And then Conestoga wagons also were part of the supply lines that came up from down in Cheyenne, Wyoming to Deadwood. I know the guy that wanted to do the Marquis de Moors from North Dakota down to Deadwood, he would have bought I think it was 20 Conestoga wagons to try and open up another trail system. Didn't work very well. I think it lasted maybe 6 months, and then he decided that, well, since I'm not going to win the mail contract, I'll just close the shop up. But then the Conestoga wagons also were kind of critical on the Bismarck to Deadwood Trail and the Fort Pierre to Deadwood Trail. And then, of course, the last 2 ones that we know of were the branch that came out of Nebraska up from Sidney, and that led up past Shattern, up past present-day Hot Springs, and up into that neck of the woods around Horsehead. But you just kind of wonder how many of those wagons this guy's company helped put together. But then again, when you think about 1831, the other important thing to realize, back then, South Dakota came into the Union in 1889. Same thing with North Dakota. And so a lot of the states to the west of there, from Ohio going that way, Wisconsin was already a state. Minnesota was a state. I'm pretty sure Iowa was a state, or at least a territory. But as the country grew, here was a company that was able to manufacture something that helped spread the United States. But this has been our little journey into the Studebaker family line.
I thought it would be longer.
So did I.
You barely got 15 minutes. Wow. I mean, almost 16 minutes now.
Almost 16 minutes, but yeah. The thing that I always thought was kind of interesting with Studebaker and Packard as well, I remember that they built a huge factory over there in, I think it was either Detroit or Chicago. And, of course, after World War II happened, when the economic downturn kind of hit a lot of those automobile companies, I think Packard had a huge warehouse that's now, they're finally getting a chance to either tear it down or renovate it. But, back in those days, automobiles were king. And some of those Studebakers, I mean, my dad speaks highly of the Golden Hawk. We got to see one of those in the museum over in Gillette.
Yeah, I kind of remember that.
Yeah, and I think I probably still have pictures of it. But of course, what's funny is you go and look at that museum on Facebook, and there's the car. Mm-hmm. So, but when my wifey put the name of the guy up there, I was like, oh, so it was his birthday. He was born in 1831. It's quite a time span to take in work. And again, the thing is crazy. You think about back then, the blacksmith shop, so, shoeing horses, kind of like some of the headstones we saw.
Right.
Veterinary, work back then was a big field. And then when they went up to wagons, eventually you had carriages. You had stagecoaches that, again, they had to have either horses or cattle that would pull the wagons. And eventually, shortly after he died in 1901. 1903, the automobile company formed. And they had the first gas engines in 1906. Mm-hmm. That's
he missed everything.
Yeah. Either that or he's like, I've had enough. I'm out. So, but this has been the Bearded Historian. We will see you folks next week, and have a good night out there.